Happy Tuesday, NCAA basketball fans. This is your weekly Trogcast, two really old guys talking NCAA basketball. This is Jeff Zink here, and I'm joined by my good friend Jim Reaker. Jim, how you doing today?
Oh, pretty good, Jeff. We're getting closer to that special holiday, and the games just keep coming.
Games, and you've got to be happy. You haven't talked about it much this year, but your Fort Wayne Mastodons did it again last night. I don't know if you saw that, but they beat IU by 20.
I did see the score. I didn't catch any of the game. Yeah, and that was really kind of a surprise because, you know, the Hoosiers had a big win over the Irish Notre Dame in the Crossroads Classic on Saturday, and you thought maybe Archie Miller finally had the Hoosiers rolling in that direction that, of course, that program's waited for a few years. But I guess the Mastodons shot the lights out, 17 three-pointers, and Archie Miller said, you know, sometimes one of the hardest things to do in college basketball is to not get kicked in the face, but to deal with success. So I think maybe he thought that they just were riding a little too high after that big win over the Irish.
Well, it'll take them a while to settle. I mean, their losses aren't bad. I mean, 2 in-state losses to the Mastodons at Fort Wayne. And for those of you who may not have joined us last year, that was Jim's sleeper pick all year. He even picked them before they beat the Hoosiers, and he made a lot of great predictions there. We haven't heard as much as Jimmy the Reek this year, but there.
I got one for you today, but I'll hold off on that one. I got a big one, so make sure you stay tuned here because I'm going to give you a shocking prediction.
Okay,
later in the show.
That's the way to lead them in and keep them coming back from the commercials that we don't have. Indiana, I mean, 2 in-state losses to Indiana State and Fort Wayne, but their other losses, Louisville, Michigan, Duke, and Seton Hall, those aren't really bad losses. So maybe Archie Miller will have them back the way we want them, just sitting at 6-6. Before we get to the other things, the other big news of the week is the firings have begun. Mark Price out at North Carolina, Charlotte. Most people remember Mark Price for his NBA years. At a 3-6 start, they'd lost 4 in a row, so they decided to go in the proverbial other direction. 30-42 wasn't making it. And Houston Fancher, who was on Price's staff since the former head coach of Appalachian State, would take over. And the 49ers did win their first game under Coach Fancher against East Carolina. So, you know, what have you done for me lately begins. Mark Price really only had a couple years there at Charlotte. Some people are saying he got out too soon, but I'm sure we'll be seeing more of those as we get into conference play.
Yeah, it's the sad reality that, of course, it's not too sad because most of these coaches that get paid get their contract money anyway. So you can't feel too bad for them because they're usually making out pretty well. So kind of like retirement, you know, getting paid for not working.
Rub it into our listeners who are out there working hard today. But the big thing is this week is the big doings in the Big 12. You know, Oklahoma, we did talk about them a little last week, and they were sort of on the cusp, and they made it happen by dropping Wichita State, and the nation is introduced to Trae Young and a couple others before I let you cut loose, just so people know. You know, Oklahoma State drops Florida State from the list of the unbeatens with a big win. TCU in there, you know, they're one of only 4 undefeated teams right now, and they also have in the top 25 West Virginia at number 10, and their only losses to Texas A&M, number 14 Kansas, number 18 Baylor, who have only lost to Wichita State and Xavier, number 21 Texas Tech. In fact, the worst team in the league right now is Texas, which is at 7-3, but their losses are to Gonzaga, Duke, and Michigan. So your early year prediction that the Big 12 just might be the power conference this year seems to be starting before they get into conference play.
Yeah, and I introduced myself. I was not aware of Trae Young, and I happened to tune into that Oklahoma-Wichita State game, and just another thing that makes that a great win was at Wichita State. Wichita State, you know, a lot of the experts saying they're a Final Four team, maybe a national championship contender, and Oklahoma goes in there on their floor, on the Wichita State, the Shockers floor, and beats them. But, yeah, Trae Young, wow. if you have not seen this kid play, which I hadn't and really didn't know that much about him, he is unbelievable. He is a scorer. He is in control. Only a freshman. Actually, the interesting part of that is he's from Norman, Oklahoma. He grew up 10 miles from where the Sooners play their games. But right now, as a freshman, he is the leading scorer in the country at almost 29 points a game and dishing out almost 9 assists a game. And he's shoots 47%. You got to watch this guy play. He's not a physical specimen, he's 6'2", kind of slight in build, but man, can he play. And he could have went to Kansas. He could have went to UK, probably could have gone anywhere he wanted to go, but he decided to stay home in Norman, Oklahoma. And actually there's a kind of a sidebar on this, that his father, who played, I believe, for Texas Tech and grew up near Texas Tech, actually wanted him to maybe go someplace else. Didn't want him to stay home, felt like he was the hometown kid, and if things didn't go well, he would have to read all the negative press. But, and here I'm going to give you my prediction here, going out on a limb, but the reason why he made the statement he stayed home is he didn't want to go to Kansas, which they thought they had him. Bill Self thought he was going to get him. He didn't want to go there and be part of the 14th straight championship, Big 12 championship at Kansas. He wanted to be the one that played on the team that ended that 14 or 13-year run, which is going into its 14th season. So I'm going to go out on a limb and change a prediction I made earlier. I said, yeah, Kansas will do it again. They'll win it again. They look pretty strong. Kansas is struggling a little bit. They did win last night over Houston Baptist, but they had a very, very close game against Nebraska. And Nebraska they're better than they've been, and that game was at Nebraska. But I just don't think Kansas has it this year. They're waiting on a guy I don't know much about, Billy Preston, who a top player out of L.A. I'm not quite sure what his issue is, whether it's eligibility. I believe they're trying to get him cleared. But I still don't think they're going to have it. So I'm going to say, and I don't know if it's going to be Oklahoma, but just what you talked about, you got West Virginia, you got TCU undefeated right now, even though they haven't played anybody in the Power Six. Oklahoma State, there's just so many teams. I'm going to go out on a limb and say Kansas, their streak is going to come to an end this year. They are not going to win or even have a share of the Big 12 championship.
Woo! Big shift there. Big shift in the middle of the year there to see what's going on there. And of course, we're going to see now. Trying to find out. Let's see now. That game, I guess, January 23rd is when KU and Oklahoma will play in Norman, and then the second one will be 2/19. But yeah, lots of powerhouses in there. Texas Tech, Texas Christian that we talked about. There's just they're going to beat up on each other, and we'll see it. But you never know how Bill Self will come out. But Lon Kruger seems to find these kids all over the place. You got to remember he had Bobby Heald a couple years ago, and he was just a fantastic all-around player. And now he's got somebody like Trey Young that could lead them to the promised land. And on the KenPom statistics, I mean, they're right now, of course, this always happens, kind of like our discussion last week about on our Razorcast about this is the best team ever. I mean, they're already sort of comparing him to Steph Curry's best years or Jimmer Fredette's best years in the NCAA. But I think I'll take a little caution on that. 10 games in, you don't want to quite go that far.
Yeah, but it's going to be – here's one bet I would take for quite a bit of money. Whoever wins that Big 12 is not going to be undefeated. Again, that's a league, only 10 teams in the Big 12, as we always joke about, but they play a double round. Everybody plays everybody home and away, and there's no way anybody can go through that with the teams you're looking at and the talent you're looking at can go undefeated. You're going to lose. You're going to have a bad night. And I think that's part of what's going on in college basketball. Again, I think there's just so much parity that anybody in the top 100 can beat anybody on a given night, I think.
Well, and that's an easy prediction to make. I mean, last week at this time there were 8 undefeateds, and 3 of them dropped. Cincinnati dropped Mississippi State, and Syracuse dropped Georgetown Hoyas, which was expected. The Florida Seminoles, what we'll talk about here in a little bit, they got dropped, like we just said, to Oklahoma State. So the only ones really left are Arizona State, the Miami Hurricanes, the TCU Horned Frogs, and the Villanova Wildcats. And nobody's really going undefeated in the country or probably in their division. It just doesn't happen the way you said. And it didn't happen all that much in the past. Even those great UCLA teams often didn't get through the Pac-8 at that time undefeated. So lots of good things going on there in the Big 12. Anything else to add before we move on?
No, it's just going to be a fun year to watch that league through the winter. And again, there's going to be some great games. And hopefully Bill Self isn't listening to this, because he'll probably make this bulletin board material. You know, me saying that they're not going to win their 14th in a row might motivate them too. But again, I've watched them. They're just not as strong as they have been, and I think I'm not sure who it is. I think they're missing another player that they were thinking they were going to have for either an injury or an ineligibility. And the big thing is, if you remember Frank Mason, who was a great point guard, he was the leader of that team and always kind of kept them going. And I just don't think, although Devontae Graham is a great player, I don't think he's quite the leader that Frank Mason was, and that might be part of the issue. And maybe he will play into that role as the season goes on. But I'm going to, again, say that the Kansas Jayhawks, they're not going to win the Big 12 this year, or even have a share of the prize.
So the string will be broken. You heard it here first, and I'm sure that Bill Self waits on the grueling truth for it to be posted so he can listen to us. I have no doubt about it. But on other topics, we talked last week about how the craziness is in it, and it's settling in. We expected it to sort of be a quiet one. A lot of teams paring it down for the holidays. Which talked about in the week to come, all that. But still, we had the Oklahoma win over Wichita State. Rutgers beats Seton Hall. Indiana, who we just talked about, up and down, they took it to what seems to now be a foundering Notre Dame. Clemson beats Florida, and that's Florida's third loss in 4 games. Of course, the one win is against Cincinnati on a neutral court. And like you just mentioned, Kansas just escaped Nebraska to avoid its third loss in a row, the other two being to Washington and Arizona State that we talked about last week. So, I mean, when you look at it, of course, when I mention teams like Rutgers and Nebraska, people don't envision them being in the Big 10+4. But they are there. So maybe the Big Ten isn't as dead as we thought it would be. It's just time for some different players to emerge.
Yeah, and if you look at Rutgers' losses, 2 of them in the Big Ten already, to Michigan State, and we know how good they are, Minnesota, who's had an upswing year, and Florida State, who, again, just has lost a couple games lately but got off to a great start. So if you look at Rutgers and then beating Seton Hall, who a lot of people had picked maybe to finish as high as second and even contend for the lead in the Big East. Rutgers, they are set to have a good year. But here's a team that really has impressed me besides Michigan State. We know Michigan State's going to be good. We know they got Mikal Bridges, who is maybe the player of the year. But Purdue, really, they demolished Butler the other game in the Crossroads Classic in Indianapolis last week. And I did get a chance to watch a lot of that game, and Butler's a decent team. We think they're going to be, middle of the pack or so in the Big East and probably go to the big dance. But Purdue just look so good. And here's what they got. They got Isaac Haas, 7'2", and not only is he 7'2", he's fairly athletic. He's in the middle for him. And his substitute, the guy who comes off the bench to play behind him, Matt Harms, is 7'3". They got 2 7-footers on that team that are fairly. Sometimes you get these tall guys that they're not great basketball players. Both these guys are great basketball players. And then they're led by, and if you haven't seen this guy play, he's a player, Carson Edwards, who's leading them in scoring with 17 points. And then you got Dakota Mathias, he's kind of like the J.P. McCura of Purdue. I just like this team. They got a lot of pieces. They can beat you in a lot of different ways, and they may challenge Michigan State for that Big Ten championship. And I'm not a homer for Purdue. Believe me, I grew up in Indiana, but Purdue was never ever my favorite school or team. But I saw them play, and I think they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. I like the way they play.
Well, I think top to bottom, you're looking at, other than Michigan State and then you throw Purdue in there, nobody's really dominant like they have been in the past, but everybody seems to be solid. Ohio State, a little better than people thought they were going to be. Michigan's had a good run here in the preseason. Maryland's back. You got Rutgers. Who would have thought Nebraska would be playing the way they are? And a couple teams we thought would be higher, like Minnesota and Northwestern, have dropped down a little bit. But top to bottom, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. They may not have as many powerful teams there in the Big Ten as they've had in the past, but they're going to have some pretty solid teams that are going to make some noise.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot like the Big 12, and although they don't play the whole, part of the schedule is they don't play everybody twice, so how that pans out sometimes is the luck of the draw with the schedule.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then we can also look at it, another one of your conferences, and we can talk a little bit more about this on the Razorcast on Thursday, but the Big East is bringing home the bacon. They thought there might be a bit of a downswing, but now you've got the top-ranked team in the country in Villanova. Xavier's back in the top 10. Their only loss is to number 3 Arizona State, and they've beaten teams like Baylor and Cincinnati. Seton Hall dropped a little bit. They were 15 last week. They're at 23 now, and Creighton has moved into the top 25. So there's another one of those Power 6 conferences that we weren't sure how strong they were going to be. We figured kind of like the Big Ten, they'd have a couple big ones in the top 2, but they're going to be stronger than most people thought before they start beating up on each other next week.
Yeah, and if there's a true number 1 in the country, it's Villanova. They are a very, very deep team. They have a lot of talent, and they have experience too. They don't usually get a one and done. Those guys kind of just below the blue chippers that come there, and they usually stay for 4 years. And Jay Wright, of course, is a great coach. And if there would be a team that would go undefeated through the regular season, it could be Villanova. But again, we've talked about, I don't think they can do that. I don't think they can run the Big East just, again, because of the grinder it is, the different places you got to go, the different teams, that they're going to have to play. I mean, even going to like Butler is a tough place to play, and Hinkle Fieldhouse. So I don't think they'll go undefeated, but they are a very, very good team. Of course, we'll talk more about Xavier on Thursday with the Razorcast, but Xavier, this, like we talked about it last week on the Razorcast, might be their best team ever. They're a little beat up right now, but they should be okay. And I'm going to give some kudos to Georgetown, even though they hadn't played anybody before they played Syracuse, and they did play Syracuse at home and lost in overtime. I think that was a good move on their part, bringing Patrick Ewing in there. He seems to have that program at least pointed in the right direction. Again, they didn't play a real tough non-conference schedule, and they're probably going to finish near the bottom of the Big East. But I think we're going to see them probably pull off some big upsets in the Big East and maybe challenge for a 500 record, which would, I think, be a great move forward for them in the Big East. And here's the team that is just very, very scary. And they just picked up a transfer who became eligible last night in their game versus Northern Illinois, and that's the Marquette the Marquette Golden Eagles. First of all, I believe they're the best three-point shooting team in the country. In fact, they are shooting almost 40% from three-point land. Andrew Rousey averaging 22.8 points a game. Marcus Howard, 20.8. Those are their three-point specialists. And now, just yesterday, Harry Frawling became eligible. He was a transfer from SMU, and I hadn't heard of this guy. I was catching a little bit of this game, so I did a little background on him. He came from Australia. He's 6'11", And he came to SMU, and then Larry Brown left, and he didn't see eye to eye with the new coach, or it wasn't what he expected. So he left in the middle of last year. That's why he's becoming eligible right now. Supposedly he was not in very good shape. In fact, from the time he stepped foot on campus up at Marquette, they put him in a program, and he went from 273 pounds down to 235. I think they said he's up to about 250 now, but that 15 pounds he put on after he lost all that weight was muscle, not fat. And his body fat went from like 24% down to 14%. So he's going to give them an inside presence, which was kind of their lacking. They were relying on the three a lot from those two guards. So that's going to make them a little bit different of a team, and going to give them somebody to bang with the big guys in the Big East. So, and Marquette that's just a tough place to play. Also, remember Villanova, I believe, was number 1 in the country last year and went into Marquette and got defeated on a cold winter night in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lots of things going on there, and the Big East is always tough. And we're not ignoring some of the other teams. You know, the ACC does have 4 of the top 13 in Duke, North Carolina, Miami, and Virginia, and the SEC's got 2 in the top 10 with Kentucky and Texas A&M. But this is just what's happening this week. Is that those 3 conferences, the Big 12, the Big East, and Big 10, sort of made things rumble. So we'll be talking more about those as we come. Might not be on the air next Tuesday, being the day after Christmas. We might take a week off getting into conference schedule, but there's always plenty to talk about. And that leads us into the week coming up, and this is why it might be a good time to take it off. There's not really much going on. Teams gotten through their exams and trying to give their kids the holidays. When you look at some of their opponents, like you mentioned, Michigan State's playing Houston Baptist, and Arizona State's playing Longwood. North Carolina's playing Wolford. There just aren't any really big games out there. In fact, there's no matches between anybody in the top 25. But the only thing really going on is this Saturday, the annual CBS Champions Challenge, where Big Ten, ACC, SEC, and Pac-12 big names get in there, but they don't quite have the luster that they have because it's OSU for the Big Ten was scheduled. They're going to play North Carolina, and Kentucky for the SEC, and UCLA for the Pac-12. And OSU, they might give North Carolina a struggle there, but UCLA is just beat up with the suspensions and the leavings. They really only have about 8 kids on the bench, and Cincinnati just pounded them the other day with that in Pauley Pavilion. It was just an ugly game for the Bruins. So, I mean, big names and names people know, but I'm not sure they're going to be the games they've been in the past.
Yeah, it is kind of a down, but here's I think the issue that coaches, ADs dealt with this year, because Christmas being on Monday, and so you got the weekend just right behind Christmas. You hate to give up a weekend of not playing, but it's kind of hard to play on Christmas Eve, as a lot of these players, let's remember, they are students. They do have families. They do have lives. So giving them a chance to travel home, at least for Christmas Day. And then and this is what really makes it tough, right on the other side of it, like I know the Big East starts their conference play the 27th of December. So I'm sure there's a lot of coaches that just want to make it through this stretch, and no matter who they're playing, they're usually playing at least Thursday, Friday, Saturday in that the Sports Champions Classic, those 4 teams down in New Orleans. So it's just a tough way the schedule has played out with the holiday this year. And, again, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of quick visits home, and you don't know how that's going to affect your players. And, look at what happened, the situation in Atlanta yesterday or the day before with all the electricity going out in the country's largest airport, and, trying to get kids back on campus or wherever they are to play. So a lot of coaches probably just hoping that this next week that they live through it. And, here's a game, Xavier, they're going to Northern Iowa. And Northern Iowa's, they're no slough. They're pretty tough, and now they got to go to Cedar Falls on the 22nd, which is this Friday night. And again, then they're going to probably, and a roster like the Musketeers have of guys from all over the country, probably trying to travel home, and then to be back, and then they're on the road at Marquette. I mean, I'm sure the logistics is just tough to figure that out. So, again, I wouldn't want to be in some of those coaches, just trying to keep things going through this season.
Well, you bring up a great example there in the Xavier Musketeers, who basically took a week off after hosting and thumping Colorado. Coach Mack gave them time off, and they came out very rusty on Saturday because it was an afternoon game, and they hadn't practiced much. And Eastern Tennessee State took them to the mat, but they just got up at the end, 68-66. So those are sort of some of the things that can happen. Hopefully they'll bounce back tonight against the Conference USA's Marshall. But the week following is there'll be a lot more things to talk about. That's when the conference play will come into vogue, and you've got more top 25 matchups. Duke's going to play Florida State the following Saturday, that Saturday before New Year's. Oklahoma goes to TCU, and that's right away what you were talking about with the Big 12, where they're going to get into it. So there's more and more going to be big matchups as these teams play each other, and whereas hardly anybody plays on Christmas Day. There's like one little tournament that was out in Hawaii without any really big names. Teams don't shy away so much of playing around the New Year's holiday. So there'll be a lot more games going on there, and we can talk about them as they come through. And that can lead us right into our trivia and tidbits as we head into the Christmas holidays.
All right. So trivia for today. The Champions Classic you talked about, Ohio State, North Carolina, UCLA, UK, playing down in New Orleans on Saturday. Here's your question, and I'm going to give you 7 seconds to answer this. So I'll give you a little time to think about it, but not enough time to do your research on your computer right there. So here's the question. Between Ohio State, North Carolina, UCLA, UK, think about that, maybe 4 of the bluest blue bloods in all of college basketball, how many national championships have they won combined?
Oh, Lord. And I have 7 seconds.
I'll give you an error of 2 either way. All right.
All right. Well, UCLA's got 12. Kentucky's got 8, I think. That's 20. North Carolina's probably around 5 or 6 now. That's 25 or 6. And OSU, they're the smallest one. I think they've only got a couple. Let's go with 27 total.
Oh, you hit it. The actual total is, and I didn't check this, I just read this somewhere in a little promo for that, is it says they have 25. So you win today. You got within the margin error of 2.
You're too good to me. Plus, it's a holiday. You threw me a cupcake there. The one that you thought wouldn't be so bad. Well, that's great. Before we sign off, then we'll decide to just watch The Grueling Truth. We're on the air next Tuesday and working around all the holiday hoopla. We'll do that. If not, we'll see you in 2 weeks. And, of course, we'll have our Razor Cast on Thursday, which is all things about Xavier basketball. On this date in 1980, the movie Raging Bull is released. One of Robert De Niro's 2 Academy Award-winning performances, and a great boxing movie. If you've never seen that, go and see that. Martin Scorsese at the helm. And this week, in 1891, we got the best Christmas present ever. On December 21st of 1891, it's the first documented game ever of basketball in Springfield, Massachusetts. 18 students played based upon Dr. James Naismith's rules for the first time. And also in sports history, 1989, switch those digits, December 24th was the famous Chaminade upset of the number 1 ranked Virginia Wahoos, 77-72. A small school with just 850 students at the time pulled off what's become, people think, an almost annual event as groups go out to Hawaii to enjoy the holiday and the upsets that happen. And on Christmas Day itself, both pleasure and sorrow for baseball fans. In 1958, Hall of Famer Rickey Henderson, the all-time base-stealing king, was born. And sadly, in 1989, fiery player and manager Billy Martin died in an auto crash. So we want to wish all of our listeners a very, very happy Christmas time and a great 2018 full of NCAA basketball. And, Jim, any final thoughts from you before we sign off for the day?
No, just want to say Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year, and hopefully our fans can enjoy time with their family, and looking forward to the new year. It's going to be a great year for NCAA basketball. Lots of good games in the near future.
All right. So have fun with that. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, everybody, and we'll see you next time on The Grueling Truth.